So, by this time, I had completely stopped using drugs, and um, I still had all these things going on. I learned very quickly what the locust was, because certain of the members of the cult or whatever the group were trying to convince me that they were Christians too, and they showed me like how you could talk through walls to each other with it and stuff. But and at least 50 or 60% of that town has it or uses it, you know. And so everywhere you go, it's like, and then they're always like lying and like making plots with each other with it, or pretending to be God and all these things. So I learned about its range and various, and after that I left and I walked up the Kalama River all the way up. I had met the werewolves. Now I call them storytellers because they started to tell me things, and I knew that they were shapeshifters and they were able to, they had amazing wisdom that they were teaching me. Cool things about the stars and just various. So I went up the Kalama River. I went way out into the forest where their kingdom was. I walked for miles and miles and miles to get there. And I took my ID and I threw it away there in the forest. And then as I was walking up the logging road, one of them said, "Stop, follow the ancient road." And there was a river or a stream going down the hillside there, and I climbed down that and I slid down the hill, right? And then I hit my hand on a rose bush, and there were, it was like a front door, and I got a thorn in my hand. And then in this stream area, there were like, little places and stuff. And then one of the storytellers was all, "Don't touch the ferns," right? Oh, and then they said, "We're not werewolves, we're warehousers," right? And I thought that was really funny. But, don't touch the ferns, like that was their garden or whatever. And yeah, so I'm going through there, and there's like a chew toy on the ground next to the river, like, in the middle of the woods. But there was areas where it was like a circle of sort of plants. And then eventually I learned how to identify where they actually are, even though you can't see them, or where they might be by just the way that certain things are decorated in nature. And so anyway, I met the whole entire kingdom, and they all came out to meet me, and they even had children and stuff. And my boots had turned my socks into just multicolors from walking through the mineral water, because it's like runoff from the mudslides and volcanic mudslides of Mount St. Helens. And then they were telling me about how one day all the entire forest would be burned up there, and so, but they were like, "Don't ever bring any other humans here." And so I was like, okay, and then I went back to my hotel room in Longview. Now this is about the time of 2013. And as far as the drugs thing, if you want proof, like, you can go and look at my medical records. It's just fact, okay? Because I had also been picked up and tested at that time. So I got back to my hotel room, and then I was staying there, and then I was still getting hit with visions and stuff. Still, half of the people at least were witches in that room, because that's who's using the locust, okay? And in the hotel. And so then I was getting a few more visions of stuff, and just one that really scared me. And all the storytellers were playing with me too at the time, because that's when I started to understand a little bit more, And so I got scared, and I from one of the visions, and so I left, and I went and I walked, or I took a bus up to Bellingham, Washington, where I am now, as a matter of fact. And I had never been here before, but I went and I found a park, and I slept by a tree, and then I got woken up at like 3 a.m. by some pounding on the tree, boom, 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 and it just reverberated through the whole tree, And I was like, yeah, that's a Bigfoot, And then I started to understand that that's also what the storytellers were, Sooner or later, I started to realize that because they were shapeshifters, but that they were like everything, every monster or whatever in the monster manual and all this various stuff like that. But but they're angels actually. And so I stayed in Bellingham for just a short while. I called my mom and dad, and I told them that just to let them know that I wasn't missing, but that I wasn't coming back to Longview because I was trying to get away from the witches, And then I wound up getting another bus ride to Spokane, Washington, and there I met another tribe of storytellers. I was on a mountain in the middle of a forest, and suddenly, I was camping, and suddenly I heard wolves like all around me. Like one howled on this side. I was on like halfway on the hill, right? So that I wouldn't. So I was being trained like in military style too, like the whole time. I was being taught things like I have to keep my shoelaces as tight as possible, or like I have to sleep on the middle of the hill, or like when I cache in my backpack, I have to do it in the middle of a field, in these various things like this. Because I was on foot, that's all I was doing. But this is just like kind of the help that I was receiving. And so I'm sitting up here on this mountain in the middle of the forest, and I hear one wolf like directly, maybe only 10 yards from me, howl. And then another one like off to the side, maybe 100 yards, howls. And I'm hearing wolves yapping and howling across the lake that I was by. And so I got up real quick, and I lit a fire, but I couldn't light a fire, so then I lit tobacco, and because I was like, okay, so the wolves are going to run away, and then I'm like, okay, this is a peace pipe, you know what I'm saying? Like to keep predators away because they're afraid of men. All right. But then from the side of the hill, I saw a flash, boom, boom, like just out of nowhere, like what you would say was an orb, just all of a sudden blink, blink, and then they moved closer, and I knew, that it was another tribe of storytellers, and they came in, and I shared my story with them by staring into their eyes, or you keep your eyes open, and supposedly they learn your story, so I was like talking to them in the spirit, and then all these other things, so they learned my story, and then like he stood up, the king of this tribe or whatever, he stood up, and he spread it out to the rest of the tribe, and they were all rejoicing because it's like for them it was like their ecology or their social structure, whoever had the best story and stuff. But around there it was just like there was just one or two that would be living like, and they weren't in like, you know, just one down by the river. It wasn't like a giant kingdom like it was, or an empire like it was here on the west side of the Cascades. But they were pretty cool. So I made one of them as a friend, and he walked around with me in Spokane the whole time until the point that I left, and I took a bus ride back to Longview. This was still, I think, still 2013, but could be coming up into 2014 now. And at the bus station, I was on this second or third story. You know, I was at least 20 feet in the air on the top level, and I turned and looked out the window, and then all of a sudden he appeared as a human being, just floating outside the window there, and sort of waved goodbye to me. And then I went back. You know, then I went in, and the whole time it was about, you know, maintaining rationality and all of that, you know, and making sure, because I knew, like in my heart, I knew that all they were trying to do was prove, you know, that I was insane so that they could take my children or whatever, the witches or whatever. So, you know, I came back, reunited with my children, got a job there, enrolled in school, you know, and then graduated high school with a 4.0. You know, I was 34 years old, but I only had one semester left to complete my schooling. And then I went into aerospace engineering because by this point, you know, God himself had been speaking to me, and that's when we began to develop the executive outline, because what mattered was, you know, facts, rationality, lawfulness, physics, you know, reality, you know, and just sanity, you know what I mean? And so that's what I've started to focus on a lot. I did speeches about the different aspects as we went through them, and just, and then, you know, and then I went back into Facebook and started to gather up all of the people that I could find that were being affected by this, you know, or that were, you know, promoting the yoga and telling all the myths, right? Yeah, it's just thousands and thousands of people. And I was telling them, look, you all are not God, you know, and I was warning them and trying to save their lives, you know. But, you know, that's a different part. And then, so that's kind of why it's all kind of jumbled together when you go back and you look on there. You know, but it's like there's multiple things happening, you know. It's not just I'm sorry that it's not just a single track, you know, point A to point B thing as far as the documentation. But these were my primary goals. One, to prove my sanity. Two, to properly document everything that was occurring. And three, to save people's lives. And so that's where we are. I hope I helped you out with filling in the blanks.